Welcome to the College Knowledge Podcast, sponsored by the College Planning Network and Paradigm Financial Group. Whether you're searching for that right fit college, applying to college, or figuring out how you're going to afford it all, you're in the right place. You'll hear from deans, admissions counselors, student athletes, and scholars from esteemed universities and colleges around the country. We'll dig deep to uncover their insight and unique experiences. So whether you're a student gearing up for college or a parent with college-bound kids, sit back, relax, and listen. Like you, we have lots of questions. Our guests have the answers, and we're excited to share them with you. Let's get started. We can send your student to the school of their dreams and send you to your dream retirement. Visit us at elitecollegiateplanning.com to get started.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of College Knowledge. I am your host today, Joe Kerins. Very excited to have our guest. We are going to be talking about, I'm sure you know, heard these letters before, whether it's the SAT, the ACT, but we're going to be speaking with the CEO and founder of Mindspire, Shahar Link. Shahar, thanks for joining us today, or joining me, I'll say.
My pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Obviously, looking to have a very good discussion on SAT, and there's constantly been changes going on. And I know parents and students, look, they stress out over those three letters, whether it's SAT or ACT. We'll get into that. But wanted to, understand a little bit more about how you got to where you are, how you kind of came about to be, hey, find Mindspire, helping kids get better scores, potentially get into better schools or the school of their dreams, and, hopefully even getting some merit-based scholarships. So how did you find your way into this industry? How did you get to where you are today?
Sure. So, I was thinking about this the other day, and I realized that the passion that drives me, I've been doing this for 25 years. The first part-time job I got out of college was teaching SAT classes for the Princeton Review back in I won't say the year. I loved it right away. And after 25 years of doing something, you start to sort of take for granted why you're still doing it. But I was talking with someone the other day, and I realized that, so when I was in high school and I took the SAT, I felt like the score I got didn't represent what I was capable of. Mm-hmm. And it held me back a little bit. I didn't really study. I think I, opened up a book and tried a couple of practice tests. It was a little bit. I thought that was enough. Back then, most people didn't realize what it really took to show a significant improvement, or for a student to get there. And, it made me kind of angry back in the day. Mm-hmm. And so when I started teaching the SAT, I realized that there's something I could really help with here, which is, getting the score to represent what a student is actually capable of was immensely satisfying for me, because I knew personally what it meant when that didn't happen. Mm-hmm. And, everything turned out fine for me. I went to a good university, I got A's, and then I went to an Ivy League school for graduate school, and everything was fine. But it was tough, and I think I may have ended up with a better fit college if the scores I got were commensurate with what I was really capable of. So that's what fuels me. I started Mindspire 12 years ago. And after having tutored the SAT and ACT in Manhattan and some other places, and we started in Durham, North Carolina, and we still have a lot of students there, but we have students all over the country on Zoom, and we have a team of about 20 tutors now, cream of the crop. And, we've been doing it really successfully, but that's how I came to it. And I think it's worth hearing that story a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. So, to jump into it, maybe all our listeners don't always know that there's two tests. I think the SATs, for years, I know when I was in high school, I didn't even know there was an ACT. And I know that in the past, it was kind of a regional type thing. But how has that changed? And is there, so our families know, do you only submit one score? Do you submit both? What's the process, and what's kind of some of the differences that have changed between those tests over the years?
Right. So every university in the country accepts both the SAT and the ACT. And we definitely get calls from East Coast people who are like, the ACT, isn't that something that only they look at if you go to the University of Iowa or something? And the answer is no. Like Harvard and down to every single school accepts either test, East Coast, West Coast, Midwest, whatever. So, it's really important for students to figure out which test is better for them and submit that test.
Okay.
We have a whole process. The best way to do that is to take a practice SAT full length and a practice ACT full length over the course, one weekend, and then the next weekend, whatever, spread it out a couple more weeks so that you're not brain dead when you're taking the second test, and see which test is better. And we could help you do that. There are online resources where you could compare the scores and they'll tell you which is better. In most cases, it's pretty straightforward. Sometimes you need a little bit more of a diagnosis to figure it out. But yeah, so that's a crucial point that a lot of parents that we speak to just don't know. And in terms of submitting scores, it's further interesting, complicated in that most schools, you only submit what you want to submit. This is called score choice. So if you take the SAT 3 times and your last time is the best one, the only test score you need to submit to most universities is that last best score.
Got it.
So there's a lot of options. You could take the ACT and the SAT each twice and then just see which one is the best. We don't recommend that because that's a lot of headache and a lot of work and a lot of money. So, you want to find the test that works for you, study for it, and submit that. In terms of differences between them, until right now, they're both paper-based. And they both are right around a little over 3 hours. And the most significant difference is that the ACT has a science section that the SAT doesn't. But the SAT compensates for that a little bit by throwing in science-based passages on their reading section and on the writing section, and throwing in some more charts and graphs into even the math than the ACT has. So it kind of evens out. But the ACT science section is a little funky for most kids. It's not something they've ever quite seen before and takes a little bit of getting used to. And there's some other minor differences between what the math looks like. So the SAT is more algebra focused, whereas the ACT has a wider range. You'll find more trigonometry, you'll find more probability, and statistics and some other random things. And besides that, the reading and the writing sections are pretty similar, but again, one other difference is that the SAT vocabulary level is harder. So the reading is a bit tougher. But with the scoring, it tends to be pretty close to each other nonetheless. However, there is a big change coming up, which is that beginning in March of 2024, only the digital version of the SAT will be available. The last paper-based version of the SAT will be January 2024. And then it goes all digital. They've already been doing all digital internationally. So there's been a rollout. It's been going very smoothly. I've spoken to owners of test preparation companies in other countries who say it's gone much better than expected. The proctors know what they're doing. Very few technical issues, and the kids like it because the new digital SAT is going to be 2 hours long as opposed to 3. And for your typical 16-year-old, that's like an eternity of time. That's less. These kids get computers. They feel comfortable, taking a test on a laptop. So that's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. And I could speak more to what the new digital SAT is going to be. It's a little bit different than the current one. I can say a couple of things on that. First of all, there will be no more 90-line reading passages, right? They're not going to put on full essays that then followed up by 10 questions where you're constantly going back to that passage. Instead, you will have one reading question for one paragraph. And you're going to have about 30 something of those for the reading section. That it sounds easier. And in some ways, okay, you don't have to read a whole essay. You just have to read a paragraph, but the difficulty level is the same. It's those one paragraphs are dense, and the questions that they ask about them are serious. Questions about what is the claim being made? What evidence is the author using? What is the main purpose of this paragraph? The same types of questions with the same level of difficulty. You just don't have to read quite as much. I think they did that because on a laptop, it's hard to get all that, to get a full essay and 10 questions in a space that's usable. So they've jiggered it a little bit to make that happen.
So you unpacked, I was going to say, I don't want to get too far ahead because I want to break down some of the stuff that you said. No, it's everything you're telling us is great. I'm writing stuff down, and I said, I don't want to miss some of these questions. These follow-up questions.
I could talk about this for days. So
it's all extremely important. But the first one, you mentioned taking a practice test for each of these to determine really where should you put the effort in so you know which test you are going to basically excel at more, or which one you have a better shot of a higher score. When you say practice test, is that actually going through, like registering for these tests, taking them as if it's a real one, or a practice test that is something that's generated from, I don't know, like Khan Academy or something like that? What do you mean by the practice test?
So we actually call them mock tests to make it more clear that it's you're not going in and taking the official SAT. You don't want to do that until you've studied a bit and you feel ready for it. Just going in blind is a waste of money, $100 or so, plus a little bit of a waste of a Saturday morning, because you're just not going to get what you want to get if you go in blind. So these mock tests, there are officially released, publicly available ACTs and SATs that were taken by 100,000 students, the real thing. You can find them online. We have every single one that's ever been released. And that's what we give students for their mock test, for their baseline score tests. And you can't do better than that. There are companies that release tests that are meant to be the same as the SAT or the ACT, but aren't the actual thing that students took. And we really never use those because it's really hard to match the billions of dollars that the College Board has to create these tests and do it yourself. So that's what we recommend. We also highly recommend that you do it in a proctored fashion. In North Carolina, where we have offices, and also in Boulder, Colorado, where we have an office, we will do that in person. You can come to our office. There'll be a proctor. It'll be timed. It'll feel pretty real. If you don't live in those places, we do them online every Saturday morning at 9:30. So it's on Zoom. It's not quite the same as doing it in person, but it's close. There's a proctor there. It's live, and you kind of have other kids going on there, and you feel a little bit like you're being watched, which is the point. And then there are ways to do it completely at home. We have a proctor video on YouTube. You just press play, and it walks you through the whole 3 hour and 15-minute proctoring timing script. That's how we suggest doing it, so that you get as close to the real experience. It's kind of amazing how much easier it can be taking it at home in your room where you feel comfortable and no one's looking at you, and how much of a better score you can get than what would happen if you did the exact same thing, except in a room with 30 other kids.
Right. Yeah.
You have to practice that and get used to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I know you mentioned some of the differences between ACT. So things that I have heard, from different counselors, or maybe someone that's not necessarily in the know, is that if you're a student who tends to you be stronger in math and science, typically that's going to push you towards the ACT. But I've also heard that it's a little more time restrictive as far as like the amount of time you get to spend per question. Now, do you think those two statements hold true?
Yes and no.
Okay.
The time restricted issue is very real. The ACT is much faster paced. Mm-hmm. On average, you have about 30% less time per question on the ACT. And that's a big difference.
Yeah.
However, in terms of math and science, so the SAT is 50% math, the way it's scored, right? You get an 800 out of the math section, and you have an 800 out of the verbal section, which is combined reading and writing. And then you put them together and your total score is out of 1600. So there are a lot of cases if a student is really, really strong at math, because the SAT is 50% math, it's just going to have a bigger impact as opposed to the ACT, which is 25% math. Okay. So if you're going to get a perfect score on the math section, but bomb the others, that doesn't really happen. But, hypothetically, the ACT won't look as impressive. Whereas if you have the same situation on the SAT, it'll look pretty good. Mm-hmm. That being said, the ACT does have this science section, which one would think tracks pretty closely to the math, right? If you can get a perfect score on the math, you should get a perfect score on the science. But in most cases, the science section on the ACT is sort of right in between the reading and the math, because it's pretty reading heavy. The way it works is they give you a passage from a scientific journal that has some graphs and charts and a description of an experiment, and then you have to answer questions about it. So some very strong math students don't immediately click with that, whereas some very strong reading students just totally get the science section because they see it. All I have to do is read and answer questions about what I've read. So a little tricky with that. And again, like the only way to really know is to take these mock tests. And it's like,
got it. So then you started talking about some of the new changes that are upcoming with the SAT, going digital. Is the ACT staying paper? There's no.
From what they've said, it is staying paper. The only time the ACT is digital is if you take it as part of your statewide testing day. So a lot of states, North Carolina, for example, is an ACT state, where every public school student in the state will take the ACT in February or March, and it'll be digital. However, it's exactly the same as the paper-based test. It's just on a computer. So it's not really different. Whereas when we're talking about the digital SAT, it's a totally different thing than the current paper-based SAT.
So obviously, I don't know if the College Board went this route because of everything that happened with the pandemic and then schools essentially going optional, and I know you mentioned part of this, like, is it easier? I know that there's been also some fears from parents of saying, well, from what I'm reading, they're going to make the test easier. So if I have a standout student, it's going to not hold as much weight. I mean, you mentioned it's not necessarily going to be easier, just different. It's still going to be comprehensive. So we would kind of say that doesn't necessarily hold water, that it's not going to lessen the score for somebody that does score really well.
Yeah, it's not going to be easier.
Yeah, okay.
it can't be. The way these things work, if it were easier, then the colleges wouldn't have a standardized measure across several years. A 1,500 in a year has to be the same thing as a 1,500 now. Otherwise, a 1,500 doesn't mean anything, and the colleges don't know what to make of it. So the College Board has a gigantic incentive to make sure that these tests remain. The technical term is reliable and valid. And despite all of the issues that the College Board can have, they're pretty good at doing that. So I would trust that a 1400 today will mean the same thing as a 1400 in a year, and that the level of difficulty to get that 1400 will be the same. It will be different, however, and for some students, the digital SAT will feel a little bit easier, whereas for others it might feel a little bit harder. But on average, it's going to be the same. But that you do want to look at the individual student when it comes down to it.
Mm-hmm. So what about because again, the other piece that I've constantly been hearing about is now that so many schools have, they went optional and they haven't really gone back to it's required to submit a test. What's your opinion on that? Because I know a lot of parents say, well, my son or my daughter is not a good test taker, so we don't have to submit it, so we're not going to. My opinion is, well, look, I would say, prep for it, at least take it, because you have the option of not sending in your score if you're not up to the caliber of that, your GPA, your extracurriculars, your essay could get you in, and the SAT as well could potentially hold you back. You now have the option of not sending it, whereas you can even choose which schools you send to and which schools you don't right now. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So with this kind of change, obviously you've been doing this for a long time. What are you seeing in that aspect of with the option to submit? Do you submit? Do you take it? Where are you lining up with that concept?
So there's a good amount of data at this point. The test optional policies have been in place for 3-4 years, and that longer in some places. And on average, students who submit scores are somewhere around twice as likely to get in than students who don't. That doesn't mean that students who, obviously one thing that means is that students who are not submitting scores are still getting in healthy numbers. But if you submit a score that is 50th percentile or higher for the median score for that school, so meaning if the median score for your school is a 30, and you got a 31, if you submit that 31, you probably have twice the likelihood of getting in than a student who does not submit a score at all. So if you're serious about maximizing your chances to get into a particular school, then it really makes sense to go for that median score or above.
Yeah.
You will be greatly helped on your application. That being said, if you take these baseline tests and you're really, really far away from the median score of the school of your dreams, then there are times that we counsel families to not bother with this. It doesn't happen often. Usually kids are within striking range at least, and are within the typical range of where preparing will get them to that score or higher. But sometimes it's just really far away, or the student is just not motivated enough to make it happen. And in that case, test optional policies are a good thing. There are definitely times. Our business has the test prep business. What the overall effect is that you have slightly fewer students taking the test than used to. And it tends to be a little bit more geared toward students who are gunning for a particular school.
Right.
Which is all good. Actually, it's kind of liberating. So
I think one question that is typically on a lot of, families' minds, at least maybe it's not, they just think about the score, I need a score. I've always been, kind of wanted to know, well, okay, it's a standardized test and it's a way to measure students, one student versus another, and someone scores higher than another. But what do the scores actually mean? Like, what is it saying to a school if you do get a 1400 or an 1100? What is it saying to the school that is why they use this in the application process?
Thank you guys for being a part of College Knowledge. As you know, it's part of our mission to help you guys. So please send any questions you have to us at info@collegeknowledge.net.
Good question. Harder question. Before I jump there, I wanted to say one other thing about the other one. There are still a lot of scholarships that are, whether a school is test optional or not, if you want to get a scholarship at that school, you have to submit a score of a certain cutoff.
I was going to get there. I was going to get to
I just realized that despite all of the test optional stuff, it's kind of interesting how there are still requirements for scholarships. So if you're in that market, then you really, really should take the test.
Right. And I mean, I know statistics have proven that like one of the main ways to kind of increase a merit-based scholarship is to have an SAT score or a higher SAT score. I mean, that still has not changed, even though schools went optional. It's still, there's some schools you can go on their website and you can see that they have a scale, a sliding scale. The higher the score, the more money you'll get.
Yeah, and it's super clear. Yeah.
And some other schools are not as clear, but they're still using the same, guideline or same metric. I know ultimately how I truly have viewed merit-based money from a college is ultimately how bad do they want your student, and ultimately it comes down to, well, if they're going to offer you more money, it's because they think that you would be a great fit at their school. So you are exactly what they're looking for. And so if a standardized test can basically show a school that, hey, students that score this score or higher in our past 10 to 15 years have stayed, have graduated on time, have had a high GPA, guess what? That makes the school look better. And now all of a sudden it looks better from they want to attract those students. So you want to look as desirable as possible. The more desirable you are, the more money a school typically will offer. And, and obviously, hey, the SAT, and that's part of the reason I was like, what is the score? What does it really mean because that's what does it do to make you look more desirable with a higher score?
Right. So that's a good segue there. Fundamentally, the tests, there are two things that I would point to here. First of all, these are really core skills that the tests are testing. It's you read an essay or a paragraph and you're asked the types of questions that you would be expected to be able to answer in a university setting. What is this author's argument? How does he build or she build that argument? What is the evidence they're using? What can we infer? Right? These like really core critical reading questions that mean something in terms for a university admissions committee, if you can crush them versus if you can't. And then there's core writing skills, right? Do you know where to put a comma? Do you know what an adjective versus an adverb? You don't have to know those words, but can you tell where one is supposed to go? It's a way of getting at, do you have basic writing skills in place? Because there's no university in the country where you're going to be able to graduate without writing somewhat decently. So they really care about that. And then, of course, math. There are universities where you can get away with not doing much math. And honestly, at those types of schools, they might look a little bit less intensely at the math section. But then again, there are all these schools that emphasize technical stuff, and the math is crucial. If you can't do algebra, you're not going to succeed, and they know it. Right. So I see this whole thing, and I always have, as, there's a side benefit that students walk away from a serious effort at test prep having learned very real skills that are crucial for success in college, at least, and perhaps beyond if you're going to go to graduate school, et cetera, or, do something that's very math focused or very writing focused, et cetera. So I think admissions committees see what the test means, and to some degree, as that. The second piece is that these tests are literally the only thing that they have that is comparable across the United States and the world. There's nothing else, right? A 4.4 GPA at one school could mean something very different than a 4.4 GPA at another school, and they know it. And many admissions people know the differences between these schools, but there's a million schools in this country, and they don't know every single one. And that's when they look at the score to say, okay, so the 4.4 GPA means something here because the student also has a 1450 on the SAT. So that 4.4 is pretty real. Everything else is also very subjective. The essay and what you've done as extracurricular stuff. I mean, all of these things are harder to interpret or take more time to interpret and depend a lot on a whole bunch of other circumstances. So the other thing the test means is just something that is objectively comparable from one student to another, no matter where they live. And that matters.
Got it. So when we're talking about, okay, if you're going to go this route and you want to make sure that you're prepped, I think in a question that I've always had with this that maybe you can answer is how much is it understanding the process? How much of a student's effort should go into knowing how questions are asked, kind of the strategy behind it versus the actual topic knowledge? Understand, where's the balance there? Because again, a test can be a test, but it may not be exactly how this test is given. So knowing the time management per question, the knowing, okay, if it's multiple choice, do I get into a strategy of eliminating the options that I know are wrong? Like the actual strategy and then knowledge base, is that a 50-50? Is it you need both? You need to master both of these to really master this test? Or is it more, hey, if you know it, you'll do all right?
Yeah. It depends on the kid to some degree. If I had to say something out, in general, it's about 50-50. Okay. So 50% is, all right, I can do this math. I can read stuff and understand it. I know I know how to spot an argument or a main idea. I know where to put a semicolon, stuff like that. The other 50% is knowing how the test wants you to know these things and show that you know it. So you could really know most of the algebra you're supposed to know and not show that on the test very well in the beginning. Because, the SAT, there are 58 math questions. I think I got that right. And that's a pretty small number of questions overall. And they ask the same types of questions over and over and over again. And they're asking them in pretty specific and predictable types of ways. And some of those ways are something that many students have just never come across, even though they know the concept there. And, but their teacher just presented it differently. So that's where getting to know the test itself it can be huge. For some students, that it's all the strategy. If they walk in having like a really strong academic foundation, but they get a math score, it's always kind of fun as a tutor because I can get their score up very fast because I don't have to teach them any content. We just got to get the strategy. They take practice tests 4 or 5 times. By their 6th practice test, their score's gone up 300 points, because it was just like, oh, that's what they're looking for. Right. Whereas for some students, there's a lot more content to be learned. And that can be really, really important. So, but in general, 50-50. They're both important.
All right. So the other one I always get asked, and I'll give you my answer and you can tell me if I'm right or wrong with this one. Okay. All right. Which is, how many times should you take these tests? And I know you just mentioned somebody taking a practice test, 6 times. Okay. I'm not getting into the practice side of things. I have no knowledge of that. But what I have seen as far as being successful, because the other one is, when should you take this? Okay. My kind of piece has been that mock test that you mentioned. right, with the ACT, SAT to know where you're going. You want to take that junior year. Okay. And then I usually say, hey, this is my opinion. So, and I've heard it some people and they've agreed with me. So you can definitely disagree. I'll definitely have the conversation, want to know why I'm wrong. But I also know that the junior year GPA is extremely important in the admissions process. And I usually want to make sure that students, I would advise like, hey, you don't want to necessarily take time away from your studies that may lower that GPA to get a better SAT or ACT score when you can wait until the school year is over, prep, cram, and then take the test in the summer. And if you don't do well, then you can do it one more time before the school year starts. And typically, if you've prepped both times with that score from the mock test, that if you prep twice after the mock and you go to take it a third time, chances are you're not going to do better. The only time I've seen people do better is if they didn't prep the first two times. And then, well, really, I'm saying that the fourth time, like 4 or more, the only way you do better is if you didn't prep before 4. I don't know. Am I right? Would you agree with that kind of timeline? Would you agree that that's kind of the process? Again, just one man's opinion, but
yeah,
you're an expert in this field.
I would agree with part of it, and I would agree with it for some students, but not for all.
Okay.
In general, we counsel students to take their baseline mock test the summer before junior year.
Okay.
So we have, our busiest time for students to take baseline tests is June and July.
Got it.
Before their junior year and in August. That way they know earlier on how far away they are from what they would be proud of.
Mm-hmm.
If they're 300 points away on the SAT, then we're going to say, if you then start studying now, it's like that can take 9 months to close that gap.
Yeah.
If they're amazing and they're just like 50 points away from a score they would be super proud of, then we tell them, well, you could study now for a couple of months and take the test early in your junior year and be done with it. Mm-hmm. And because of what you're saying, because junior year is hard and it's tough to be doing everything and get a really great GPA. And that's really important. If on the other hand, if they're also really close, we might say, you're cool. Just come back in a year and do this process the summer after your junior year. Most of our families prefer to do it before. There's a peace of mind thing. I've done this. I've gotten the score I'm happy with, and I'm done.
Yeah.
A lot of families want to be done, not necessarily before their junior year, but before the spring semester. So by January or so, because the spring semester junior year is where it really gets tough. As a tutor, that's where I see, these last minute cancellations all the time. I have 7 tests tomorrow.
Right.
So it's nice to be done by like that January, February before your junior year. Or in your junior year, sorry. So we try to steer students in that direction. When it comes down to it, most students still are studying a little bit, or not many, in their junior year toward the end and in the summer afterwards. Statistically, there's an interesting statistic, which is that the highest score that students get on tests, if they take it 2 or 3 times, is the test that they take in like September or October of their senior year. There's an aspect of it which is also just maturity. So cognitive maturity, knowing when to, in the moment, understand, okay, I have no hope with this question. It's a waste of time. I'm going to move on to the next one, as opposed to spending 2 minutes and then running out of time at the end. Those kinds of little things just get a lot better between 10th and 12th grade. And so there's part of it that's just that. And there's also just part of it that, well, junior year is done. You've learned a lot more math. You've read a lot more, all of that. And you're just kind of getting better at these things.
Yeah.
So that's a little bit of a more complicated way of answering that question. We recommend that students take the test definitely twice.
Okay.
And if they're not happy with that second one, take it a third time. After that, you start to see not much happening anymore.
Yeah.
Again, unless they've never prepped, sure. And then all of a sudden they decide to do some prep between the third and the fourth. Yeah, we'll get a better score on the fourth test. Okay. But assuming that they've been working with a tutor through the process, that third test is typically about as high as it'll go before you just start to see very little return.
When you were telling me that timeline too, I don't know if this would factor in at all, but does that kind of setting the timeline a little bit earlier, does that potentially help with the PSAT as well?
Yeah. So the PSAT is in October of their junior year, and the PSAT doesn't matter for anything except for these national merit scholarships. So if you can get a super duper high score, then that looks really good on your college application. And by for a student who's in range of that, we definitely say start in June. Finish your finish sophomore year, take a baseline test. If you're at a 1400 ish or so, then it makes sense to study over the summer and maximize your chance of getting a merit scholarship for sure.
Yeah. And that national merit scholarship, if our listeners, or if that's where your student potentially is, you can go on the website and see that there are schools that it's a full ride. If you go to that school, you apply, you're a national merit scholar, it's basically automatic.
Yeah.
So obviously I know some families aren't even aware that how you become a national merit scholar is from the PSAT.
Right.
So I think I might actually change what I have thought from my timeline, just what you said, hey, take that baseline in the summer prior to, just for that added aspect as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, the biggest reason is that junior year just gets stressful.
Sure.
And what I say to parents, the phrase I use is, it's nice to have wiggle room, right? You're not doing that much over the summer. It's not going to be as stressful. If the score is amazing, cool. We know that. If the score isn't amazing and you need to go up, well, now we have over a year to play with if we need it. And that's just kind of nice.
Yeah. This has all been great. My last question kind of goes towards, I'll say, the building the college list, because this is a question that I don't know if parents are actually asking themselves or if students are asking. I don't know if you have this answer or not, but we always focus again on that social fit, right? Social fit. Hey, you're going to a school that is the right size, right? In the city, in the country, far away from home, not far, it has to be within a 2-hour drive, like everything that the students on campus are your type of people. You essentially are going to be happy when you wake up every day to go to that school. You wake up, if you're happy, you're going to do better in class because you're going to be in a good mood. You're going to retain information, better grades, potential internships, better jobs. Like it's if you go into a school you hate being there, you're not going to finish 4 years there. It's imperative. What we focus on really is, again, that financial fit, which, hey, guess what? Not all schools are affordable. You can't sacrifice your future. You can't sacrifice mom and dad's, retirement, to go to a school that just is not affordable. But the last one, when we talk about the academic fit, I've, talked to families about making sure that you're going to school that pushes you the right way, that it's not a school that you can't succeed at, or it's not a cakewalk, right? It has the right program, the right major. And again, class size being important, that if you're someone that likes to raise your hand in class and be called on, the professor knows you by name. Guess what? Not all colleges and classes have that. It's you sit in a lecture hall with 200 other people, like those classes exist. But when you're building a college list, I know that a lot of you mentioned, like, hey, this is the school of my dreams, and I want to get an SAT score that is in that median 50% or higher. Is there some, I'll say, is there some real that if you're getting, a 1200 on your SAT and the median score at your dream school is a 1400, I'm just throwing numbers out there, that maybe the student should look at that and say, that's maybe not the best school for me. And that the schools that do have my median SAT score probably may be a better academic fit. Could the SAT and prepping for that and knowing your score help actually alleviate what schools could be a very good academic fit for the student, rather than the other way around, where I want to go there, this is the school I need? I was just curious if you kind of use it backwards, if that's been anything you've ever seen.
I think that there's definitely something to that. And I've had that discussion with students. Again, we don't go deep into building the college list, but yeah, this kind of issue comes up sometimes. The only caveat I would say is that there are times when a student gets a 1200 on an SAT, but there's something weird going on. Like that doesn't make sense. They're really strong math students, and their teachers say that, and they're not at an easy school and they're getting A's in whatever it is. Then, there are a small percentage of students who it's like the pressure of the test and maybe the timing thing is just like they can crush their math, but they need a little more time to do it. And in high school classes, they have that, whereas in the SAT, they don't. So in some situations like that, I would say, don't think about that. Don't think about, well, I'm not good enough for this school. You are. But there are other cases where, that student who, if they're trying to get into a school where the median is 1,400 or 1,500 and they have a 1,200, then, they might not feel terribly comfortable at that school. And I hate to say, don't go for it. Right. But if it's sort of a miserable process to get that increase, to get to that score, then that indicates something. I like tutoring. I just had a student who I told her, like, despite what you may think, I don't enjoy torturing children. There are a lot of students, I hope even most, that find something really engaging in this process. They're learning. But if it's all just doom and gloom, then closing that gap to get into that school might not make sense, given the fact that it's just going to be really hard at the school too. Right. I think that's a good point.
Okay. Yeah. Shahar, this has been fantastic. I mean, a ton of knowledge. I know that there's a lot of stuff that you have covered that I get constantly asked about, and shed even more light on some of the, the process and how to, attack this and when the timetable is. I really appreciate the conversation. This has been great. I think our listeners are going to really enjoy this and really take it to heart and potentially say, oh, we're behind, maybe we need to get the ball rolling if, hey, we should have started this already. And, okay. So really greatly appreciate you coming on. If any of our listeners do want to reach out to you, they want to, get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
So right now it's real simple. Mindspire.com, Mindspire, one word. And go fill out our contact form. And if you mention that you heard us on this podcast, we'll take 10% off any package. We have very sort of standard package rates, 15-hour package, 25-hour package. We also have guarantees associated with 25 hours and above, meaning they don't go up 100 points for the 25-hour package. We'll work with them for free for a round for that third test. And if it's still not there, it's money back. So kind of unique. We have this kind of insurance policy. We feel like we know what we're doing enough to do that. But just go to mindspire.com, fill out the contact form. And if you mention, I heard, we want to know if you're hearing us here, it's 10% off any package.
Greatly appreciated that offer to our listeners. So, if you want to reach out, again, mindspire.com. And take advantage of this. Something you guys need. Take advantage of that discount. We greatly appreciate all of our listeners. If this is something for you, don't forget to let Shahar and his team know. This has been another episode of College Knowledge. Thank you so much for listening. Shahar, thank you again for joining us, and we will see you again next week.
If you didn't know, we have a free crash course on college funding at elitecollegiateplanning.com. This will explain different types of loans, types of financial aid, savings vehicles, and much more. Thanks for listening to the College Knowledge Podcast with your hosts, Dave Kozak and Joe Kerins. We hope you enjoyed this week's exploration of higher education, sponsored by the College Planning Network and Paradigm Financial Group. That's all for this episode. See you next time.